All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked, and we are live on Facebook as we have been coming to you for these last weeks and so. And for the new year, it's crazy to think that we're already 3 weeks into 2022, and before we know it, we're going to be pondering this next month, right? And so, as we've been talking New Wine Uncorked, an extension of what New Wineskins is all about, building relational bridges in contemporary culture through Jesus Christ. And what does that look like? And last week we were talking about relational theology, Trinitarian theology, and how it draws us in because of its relationality. And so there are some practical, upfront things that come about when you're talking about a relational theology. And so this week we want to continue it as we press on. As we were talking about the weeks upcoming, we're going to be talking about this God of the Christian Bible, the Christian scriptures, and who this God is. From day one in the creation narrative, we read about God interacting with his creation. And so then from there, we move into promises and protections and provisions and what the God says to his creation. And so we're going to continue to move towards that. But this week, we want to talk about, last week, we were talking about Trinitarian theology, how it's relational, how it involves this invitation from God to us. And then that really then plays out horizontally as well, right? Because then how we interact with each other. And so this week, a continuation before we get into the promises is with the relational theology, we're going to talk about these terms. What does it mean? And some of the terms that come up, incarnational, redemption, and reconciliation. And these are theological terms that really have a day-to-day impact on who we are as people of God. And so discussing, well, before we get to the promises, the fulfilled promises, the continued promises of this God, the God of the Christian scriptures, want to get into the truth of, well, how do we know that these promises even exist, and how do we know that they're for us, or are they for us? Well, we know this because of God's interaction with us, and the primary interaction that we as people in the 21st century, going all the way back to that first century when our calendars are marked out as zero, when we start with year zero, is the birth of this baby who is called God. And so that gives us what we call incarnation. It's where God puts on flesh. And then in that that example, Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, then says, well, here's what life is all about. Just watch how I live and how I interact. And then you go and incarnate. You become who I was, and that's the call to the church, the Christian church. And so in this model of incarnation, of stepping into life with one another, then we have truths of redemption and reconciliation. And so we want to just continue to talk about, well, what does that look like in today's culture, 21st century? It doesn't feel very inviting to actually incarnate, to step into others' lives at such a level where we actually seek to bear each other's burdens, where we actually seek to get into whatever you want to call it. You want to call it the crevices of life. You want to call it in the ditches of life. You want to call it in the gutters. You want to call it in the battlefield, however you look at this. But this is this intimacy that we have with one another. And so each one of us comes from a different background in the sense of what we're doing currently with our ministry, but we also have that similarity in the sense that we're creating the image of this God, and we talk about this. And so as we move into this, when you hear incarnation, when you hear redemption and reconciliation, those are big terms, but what are they like? Why are they important for us as Christians? And what initially comes to mind though when you hear that term incarnational? Because it's kind of one of those terms that's becoming a catch term where Christians continue to throw that out. We need to be incarnational, and maybe sometimes we don't even know what that means, and so when you hear that, it's a big term, but it's inviting some sense, it's real in some sense, but then it also is kind of ambiguous. What does it mean to be incarnational? And so what does it mean to be incarnational in the context of the 21st century and in the midst of things like COVID? how can we be incarnational if we're talking about incarnational as stepping into someone else's skin, stepping into their shoes, walking in their path? How can we do that? Can we still do that even in the midst of COVID? And so, like I said on Twitter, just the small aspects of life is what we want to step into, these small theological concepts of incarnation, and these, the questions, they're big because this God is big, and yet they're small enough for us to grasp because this God is immediate and present. So incarnation, what do we think about it, and how does it relate to today, 21st century?
Man, see, you start off with these big questions, and then you give us 14 of them, and then you're like, go. Like, Jesus is the right answer. I don't know. But
Jesus.
yeah, that's it. That's all we have. Well, incarnational, as I understand it, just as, yeah, for myself, is just kind of being the arms, the hands and feet of Jesus, essentially, man, kind of following his example, working with people and the like. Now, we're not incarnational in the sense of where God and flesh, God with us the way Jesus was. Make sure we have that clear. But at the same token, we can follow Jesus's model, and we're just we're putting flesh on his words and his actions and making them a reality in our day and time. And definitely, yes, we can do this stuff during COVID. And in particular, we have to do this stuff during times like these. This is the time where the church is more so where our who we are is being more tested. I mean, I think looking at it now, we have so many things that divide us, so many arguments that are happening within the church right now. And I've said it on the show more than anything, is that we're failing the test very often. Just looking at how the church now, in many spaces, we're passing and we're doing so many things that are helping people, and that's great. But at the same time, we're seeing so many arguments where in the media right now, where do you see Christians aligned? And it's not along the lines of helping people, by and large. I mean, if you take a closer look under the surface, you do see Christians doing stuff. But the same token, yeah, I think in many ways, seeing more and more of the divisions happening within the church, we're more so failing the test, what these times are testing us to do. So.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I would say pretty much the same thing. When we think of the incarnation, we're thinking God made flesh, right? Like we're talking about how God stepped down into this world and walked amongst us, and we're called to do the same. Like you said, Phil, we're called to be Jesus. What does that look like in our daily life? What does that look like amidst COVID, with this pandemic and everything, a lot of things going virtual? What does that mean with the masking and the vaccinations? As a follower of Christ, we're supposed to be Jesus. And I guess that means being love in as much as we can, right? Like as many ways as possible. So if that's, wearing the uncomfortable mask because it's going to protect the people around me, then I'm going to do that. If that means not going out as much and doing more over the phone or virtually rather than face to face, I'm going to do that. As much as I like being around people and hanging out, if that's going to be the way that I can interact with people and still interact with them and still be intentional on my interaction and check in and say, hey, how are you doing, but in a way that's a little bit more loving to them, then I'm going to do that. It's just being, I think, a little bit more aware of how our actions and words and even our thoughts impact not only us, but those around us. And what ways are we living out Christ? And that's really hard. I think that's a question that not only do we have to ask ourselves like daily, how am I living out Christ? but almost in a moment to moment basis, where we're saying, how are my thoughts impacting my words and actions in living out who Jesus is and how he would want me to live in this moment, let alone day and life. But yeah, I think that's the place to start.
Yeah, ditto. It's such an easy question. Thank you so much, Matt, for starting us off. That was great. Yeah, ditto. But I think part of, a couple things. One is he incarnational in our own life, right? I mean, before we can live, look, and love like Jesus in the world, is that incarnation happening in our life? Are we allowing Christ to be, or are we allowing Jesus to be Jesus in our life, right? And I think the other thing too, when you talk about lockdown, I think we need to be more incarnational than ever during the lockdown, because we're locked down with the people that we love and care for the most part. I mean, people that are close to us. And I think sometimes we have a tendency, or at least my tendency sometimes is, because of the person that is closest to me, sometimes I get my emotions out. And sometimes I think it can be emotion, because they're a person that, they're safe, they're safe. They're always going to be there for you. So you can, you can do stupid things. You'll feel guilty for a while, but they're always going to be there. And I think sometimes, we just got to be careful to be careful how we take out our frustrations, because they are the ones that we love. They are the ones that we trust. We need to make sure, I think, during this, being incarnational means just loving, loving those that are closest to us, right? Not only our neighbors, but also loving those who are closest to us. And so I think, being incarnational during this lockdown in homes with, somebody that you love dearly, I think is a challenge. And I think that we need to be able to express that to those closest to us. And I think, like they say, integrity and character, it's who we are when we're alone, and so I think, if we can be incarnational and allowing Christ to live in us, work in us, when we're alone and in lockdown, I think that makes we're better equipped, I guess, to reflect his incarnation around us.
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about love and incarnating love, how difficult it is though. With it, usually we talk about the vicinity of people closest to us, we relate to them first and then we move outward, and as we move outward it gets harder to relate. But when you're talking really about loving the other, like, it almost is harder for those that are the closest to you sometimes, because we know so much about each other, whereas going and loving the group that we interact with once or twice a year, ooh, that's easy. It's easier because I don't know some of the things that, you and I have talked about, and then you go and you act opposite of what we've been talking about, or something like that. Or I treat you in a way that you're like, wait, we were just talking about this, not to do this to other people, And so it is interesting with that incarnational, like, love has a multitude of levels, and yet it should be just simple, right? Go love the person in front of you.
Jim,
I want to add this, but I don't know if this, don't take it as advice, okay, Kayla and Matt. So I'm a grandfather, and we every Fridays we used to watch our grandson, and he was like 1 or 2 years old. And my daughter would leave for work. She's a teacher, and she'd just say, I've had a rough morning with him. Hopefully things will get better. And as soon as she would walk out the door, he was like an angel, right? He was just like this wonderful little kid. We'd have a great day. Mom would come home, right? And so she goes, I hope you're okay. I hope it was okay. He goes, oh yeah, he was fine. He was an angel, And then, like, as soon as we leave, or as soon as mom gets home, or there's that space, all of a sudden he lets loose. It's kind of like, so she's kind of like calling us on the way home. Oh my gosh, this is happening, and blah, blah, blah. But what I learned is that, grandkids, I think, it's kind of like I learned with my grandson, is that he kept it in, right? He was kind of able to hold it together. For some reason, he was able to hold it together when he was with the grandparents. But then when mom got home, because maybe it's that familiarity and whatever, but it's kind of like he would let loose. And so, Matt, like what you're saying, again, it's just that familiarity that we love these people, we know these people, and those people that we might not know as well, you know what, we have enough energy to hold it together with them, right? But it's tiring, and eventually when we go home, guess who gets, you know, the stuff that we've been holding in for so long. So
And Jim, you're right there. You're right on that. Oh man, what's the word? I don't say we want. It's funny. We wear a mask in front of strangers, essentially, right? They meet our representative. They don't meet us. But then having the true people that are closest to us, they get to see who we really are, and they actually, and the good and the bad of who we really are. And sometimes that bad outweighs the good at times, because we come home and we let it out because we're frustrated throughout the day, and we don't. And right now with COVID, not so much. We don't have some of our coping mechanisms, are things that we went to, the wandering around the mall, the going for the hike and stuff like that. Although you probably still go for a hike, but we don't have going all to the restaurants and the like, right? Where those kind of things are kind of taken away from us. So it may have reduced some of the letting go when we got at home, because So that becomes the question, though, right? Is how do we show our true authentic self, or do we show our true authentic self to people even when we're with our Christian brothers and sisters? Or are we wearing a mask when we're at dinner or going to happy hour with our Christian friends or whatnot? And then we have a whole nother story, a whole nother person at home. And now, our wives or children are trapped in the house with that real person that no one's ever really seen, and that you may not even know, honestly. So
Yeah. But don't you think that's why Jesus talks about, like, when he's when he interacts with, whether it's his disciples, it's just reading the account of Jesus with the disciples right before he goes to the cross, and he's asking them to pray, and he says, hey, sit with me here and pray. I'm tired. My spirit's tired. I get it. And this is where he goes, and he's asked the Father, if this cup can be removed. And then he pulls Peter and the two brothers and takes them further into prayer and says really intimately, hey, sit here and pray with me. And they know he needs them, which is, it's just a crazy situation. The fact that the God of all creation, who becomes human, and in the most human moment, the moment of need, what does he do? He shows his desire to rely on those around him. The three men, he asks them, hey, be here with me. It's amazing to me, because normally I think we focus on they're falling asleep, and right after that is when Peter denies him. That's when he says, oh no, Peter, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter's like, no, I will not, and yet right there in that most intimate moment, when he pulls them in and says, hey, sit and pray with me, they fall asleep, and he doesn't chastise them. He does question them and says, hey, look, I asked you to do this, right? But it's an embrace of love. And yet there, like you were saying, it's difficult though with the ones in front, right there with them, who you think, like, I think this is sometimes with family, it's like it's, or even close friends, we're like, but you should know me, and it's this ongoing kind of like tension. And like you were saying, Phil, I wonder if it's not, even though that we wear a mask for the people in front of us that are closest to us, it's almost like we're trying to mask ourselves. It's like, even with my wife, I think sometimes to myself, we've been married, 25 years, known each other for 27, been together for coming into 30 years, right? And there's still moments where I'm like, man, if she really, really, really knew who I was, like, and sometimes I even have that question with Jesus, you want me to incarnate and you want me to go and be with these people, but dude, don't you know who I am? And I'm not saying that I beat myself up and I think I'm a piece of crap and all, but I have these moments where I'm like, wait, you're asking me to be loved, and I don't know if I'm even able to grasp that I'm lovable, because I have moments where I just know the way I'm thinking about someone in front of me, or the way I'm looking at someone in is just not love. And so then I have to wrestle with myself, but saying, yeah, but Jesus, you don't understand some of my thoughts sometimes. And I think that's why the truth of incarnation, at least it gets problematic for me, or troublesome, in the sense that I have to wrestle with it, because I'm like, dude, there's no way, Jesus, that you could be asking me to be what you have been to me, this embracing, grace-filled, what I don't feel judged by Jesus, even though I've never been in his presence like I have with you three, personally there and able to grab onto him. I still have had a presence with Jesus that even in my darkest moments, I still don't feel judged. It's a strange, it's a weird wrestling match with Jesus, in the sense of I don't feel judged, but I also feel like this tension of how can I live out your truth, And so I think when we talk about incarnation, at least with me, I'm like, I love the concept. I love the truth of going and being Jesus, but at least when I find I go with this idea, and then when I get into the moment, then my thoughts get a hold of me and I'm just like, what the heck's going on here? We get into it and I start getting crazy, like, oh my gosh, don't these people understand? Look at how good I'm being and I'm trying to love them. And, and so it's like, I think sometimes with that incarnational model, Jim, you were talking about the people close to us. Sometimes the person closest to me is myself. And I have to learn that, a proper loving self, not this idolizing of self where I lift myself up and it becomes sinful then because it becomes all about me. But there still needs to be this understanding of how to embrace myself. Like, actually, Jesus does call me. He calls you, and he calls you, like, because he sees the truth of our goodness, right? He sees the truth of our being. And I'm not sure how, like, sometimes when we stop and hinder ourselves, how is it that we move beyond, right? Like that conversation that Jesus has with the Father, if you can remove this cup, please do. I feel like that's the conversation I'm having all the time. If I'm the cup though, I'm the hindrance. Hey, could you move me away from myself so that I'm not always, so how, like in those incarnational models, like how can we move forward sometimes when we ourselves are the issue, other than stepping into a lot of prayer and talking through this stuff. But I don't know if you find that sometimes I would love to be loved, but I am my own stumbling block. And then when I talk about proper love of self, though, then it's like, whoa, how do you do that without then it being selfish and self-consumption, So how do we find that balance though of seeing the person in front of us as needing love, and then also recognizing that the way I can do it is because of who I am in the image of God, that he loves me so much that I should have love overflowing. How do we do it in a society right now that focuses on self, though, to such a point that it's about me getting what I want, right? In today's, with the COVID and with masks, and do we mandate, do we not, the Supreme Court stepping in and stuff. What's the Christian to do? If I have these ideas of what it means to love the other, but gosh, that means that I need to go against some of the stuff that I feel like I don't want to do. And then, so is that loving me? Like, I'm fully, like, let's say even, let's go right there with the mask thing. Let's say I do everything to love the other. I get vaccinated, I'm boosted. Okay. And then when I get into the store though, if I'm like, well, I've got my mask on, but other people don't, like, so why should I then have to do this? Why should I be the one that's the example? How people will say, well, but you can't be reactive. You have to be the one leading the way. It's like, but why? Especially, like, what about in church? What about the other Christians? Why do I have to be the one to lead in teaching or showing others what it means to love? And is that the responsibility of the Christian?
It's like a dog pile. It's like, okay,
just keep going. Boom.
Okay, hey, let me, that brings this thought, and just, dog piling. So I'm going to go back to, like, hopefully hitting the bottom dog that just piled on first. As you're talking about, because we've talked about loving ourselves, right? I mean, that's kind of like that whole theme. But I think, maybe it's that, I was thinking about somebody that I would have to try to keep telling, I love you, I love you, I love you, whether it be my child, my wife. But I mean, it would get really tiring, right? I mean, and when we're doing that, to me, it seems like they don't believe us, right? And so I wonder if, at some point we just really need to believe that God does love us. I mean, that, that we don't, because we can, you're right. We wrestle with this. How can I be lovable and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And we talk about God's unfailing love. We talk about God's mercies are new every morning. We talk about, and we use all this language, but like you said, I think it's just coming to that point to say, okay, I really believe this. And I think once we say, you know what, I really believe this, then I think we can move on. Doesn't mean that we don't stop, right? Doesn't mean that we don't stop and pause and think, okay, I need to recalculate, because I do think that, but I think that I think we just have to come to a point and just say, you know what, I'm going to take God at his word, and I think that's part of the promises that, that you're referring to, but I just think it's, yeah, I mean, does God get tired just saying, Jim, really, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. And I don't know how you can love me and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, I love you. And I just go out there, just because it is really, I mean, I think, to a certain extent, it is about us, it is about us not feeling loved enough. It's, it's about us, and all these things. So that I want to address that dog pile as far as just the love within ourselves is just, I think it's just coming to that point to say, you know what, I'm taking him at his word. I'm taking him at his word. I'm going to believe him. And, I think that frees us up in trying to guess, what does it mean to show my love back to him? Right. I mean, so being incarnational, the bar is not that high, right? I mean, I don't think God says, I was thinking, like, for me, it's just like, hey, you know what, be salt and light. Oh, okay. And so but maybe it's just that expectation, or everybody else's expectation that, incarnational means that we have to be like, we have to be Jesus. But it's not, it's just really kind of just doing the best we can to reflect Jesus. It's doing the best we can on a journey that we still wrestle with sin. I mean, and all those things. It's those, and it's those times where we should be praying and we fall asleep, and Jesus says, hey, this is an urgent time, bros. I mean, this is, and that he doesn't bail on them. I mean, and so, the fact that we fall asleep when he needs us at the most urgent time, the fact that we deny him when he needs us at the most urgent time, the fact that he's crucified and and he's looking for at least somebody to step forward and say, hey, but he's looking at it at those that love him and they're all stepping back. And you know what I mean? He shows up 3 days later and he just says again, hey, I love you. It's like, and so I think at some point we just have to say, okay, I today and this week, I'm going to believe that promise.
I wonder if in speaking in the American context, part of our problem with even accepting love is that it's a sign of weakness to show that we need, and so to accept someone's love for yourself means that, well, I don't have enough love within me, so I need to know that you love me. And that's a weakness, because then I can't be whole without, and so we go into acceptance, and we find these games that we play with each other, right? Like when we go into groups where, yes, am I concerned about what I look like? Do I care what they think, and I think we do that. We project that onto God, where because God is so kind of out there, even though, so the thing when we talk about incarnational and when we get into theology, there's where you have a transcendence, God is above, but then you also have immanence where God is immediate. And I think God's immediacy for most people tends towards punishment or some type of like obedience, authoritative obedience, some sort of master above each one of us that is requiring us to follow these guidelines and rules and regulations, right? And so it's interesting. I wonder if, President Trump or President Biden, each one dealing with the masks and stuff, what if they just had come out and said, here's the deal. If you're American, you love God and you love country, then you love masks, love God, love country, and do what you want, right? Kind of like what Augustine said in the 3rd century, like, love the Lord your God and live as you want. And the church was like, whoa, because at least in the American context, the moment you tell someone you can't do this, what do they want to do? And so it's like, it with the Christian, it's like God can't get it right. He says, I love you, so live as you want, you know, and so people are like, oh my gosh, no, we have to have regulations. We can't just let people. So then he says, okay, fine. So I love you. And here's some, you know, whatever, the Beatitudes or the 10 Commandments. And we're like, whoa, no, you can't tell us what to do. And so I think sometimes we're just confused as to what it means to actually be in relationship with each other, you know? Maybe, yeah, Kayla.
No, there's a lot. There's a lot of thoughts that have come to mind over these different topics that you brought up. But I think that loving self, yeah. This is something that I've really had to grow and struggle with. Just in general, I think we all do, but and growing up, but especially right now, there's a lot of anxieties and doubts and fears that come with growing into parenthood. And there's a lot of like unknown and uncertainty, but at the same time, I'm stepping into that and kind of embracing that, in the sense like I'm not going to know everything, and there's always going to be that unknown and that uncertainty, and that's okay. But I don't have to have fear in that, because I do have Jesus, and he is immediate, he is with me, and he is present, and I can lean into that. But loving myself has been like a weird kind of struggle, because I have this miracle growing inside of me, and that's easy to love. And then like getting to know myself almost every single day all over again, like trying to understand where am I at? Like, what is this? What does this mean? I don't even know how I feel right now. Like there will be times where I'm crying and I don't know why I'm crying. And then I'm frustrated that I'm crying and I don't know why. And there's nothing that Chris can do to help. And he's like, are you okay? What's wrong? What do you need? Like, and I feel like that's kind of what God does. He steps in and he's like, hey, I'm here. Like, you're okay. I got you. And we are just like, but I just ah. And we're so like caught up in our mess that we don't even take a step back and we're like, okay, I need to just breathe. I need, like, it is going to be okay. But also it's okay to rest in those emotions. There's just, it's a lot. And I think that learning, like stepping into this journey of parenthood and learning how to love myself in that and be okay with, you know, doubts and uncertainties has helped me grow closer to God, and honestly, because I've gotten to see a little glimpse of how he loves us through the eyes of a parent and their child. And already, like, even through this struggle, even through the uncertainty, even through my doubts and my anxieties, I know for sure, I know for certain, without a doubt, I love this child like so much, and I have not even met them yet, and I love them, and that's the kind of love that God has for us. And there is peace in that. There is comfort and there's stability, and there's going to be a lot of struggle, and there's going to be a lot of mess of me, and my humanness, but there is that constant of God in the midst of that. And regardless of how I'm struggling to parent or love myself and love this child in the midst of their screaming tantrum, and I don't know how to react in the moment, I know that I can be like, okay, I can take a step back, I can take a breath, you've got me. And the more that I do that, the more that I just let go of myself and my thoughts and fears and doubts and anxieties, the more that I embrace God in those moments, then I can better love myself, in the moment and ongoing, and then learn how to better love myself and learn how to better love the other and how to react in better ways. That was a jumbled mess, but I think it's just a moment by moment thing where we have to just kind of let it go and like step outside of ourselves and just be okay with all of that mess, but also allow ourselves to take a breath.
Yeah, amen, Kayla. It was good. It was good. I know as you were sharing, I was thinking there are a couple of ironic things going on that you were sharing. So one of the idea that you're feeling that you felt that you're understanding God's love for us more as your child is growing inside of you, right? And at the same token, you understand that you're in constant need of God at the same time. So it's so weird to think that that's, part of our condition, right? Is that we're in constant need even as we're understanding his love more and more. But the thing, of course, we all understand the perspective of your husband, the three of us, and when you're crying for no reason and we're just like, what can I do? And wifey's like, nothing. And we're like, oh, well, okay, I'll just sit here. Can I bring you chocolate? Whatever. But at the same token, when we think of the overwhelming nature of God, I mean, how many of us have just done this where a song gets stuck in our head or a Bible verse or something gets stuck in our mind, and as we just sit there and meditate on it, we're brought to tears, or we're just overwhelmed by God's love and we just have to either sing the song, walk in the backyard and sing it loudly, or just meditate and just marinate in the thought, where that's becoming overwhelmed with God's love. That's the thing. And Matt, your idea earlier about, and I think Jim brought it up too, is just that we are just gonna have to understand, man, God loves us. I mean, that's kind of the beginning of the thing. And you brought it up earlier where if people really knew us, if we kind of just really took off the mask, if we kind of let go of anger some days and just did, sometimes the thoughts that come in our mind, yeah, there's a wicked evil person tucked in there somewhere. And we don't want that person to come out, and sometimes when that person does come out, we may feel guilty and bad afterwards, but that person with that wicked person in there that we really don't fully understand is still the person God loves. With all the good and the bad, God still loves us and demonstrates that love to us. So it's definitely a thing that we're gonna have to see. But your hard question, do we have to be the leaders in should Christians have to be the leaders in wearing the masks and the like? Now here's the weird part of that question. So many of us as Christians wonder or wrestle with the idea of whether or not wearing this mask is a thing that's actually loving. It's a thing that's going against my rights, my individual stance and the like. And I stand, I can't. Yeah, wearing a mask is the loving thing. Getting the vaccinations is the loving thing, because you're not doing it just for you. You're doing it so you don't spread this thing to other people. And it really just makes me wonder, like, we call ourselves a loving people, call ourselves a loving country, and I just wonder, how much do we actually love people? I mean, to me, this time tested it. Like, do something to benefit someone else. And the first question is, well, how does this mask help me? I mean, it doesn't like what are we doing? It's like, no, you're doing it to protect other people and they're doing it to protect you. And it's like that concept just doesn't seem to resonate. And so, yeah, I believe the church should take a stance on this one. I think that when I say take a stance on this one, we should be the leaders in wearing a mask. When you go to church, you should be the ones that's wearing the mask and wanting to show love to others. But, I could put a litany of things that I think the church should take a lead on, that Christians should be doing, that we should do to model the world, and we just ain't doing them. So I'm not surprised that we're not doing this one too. So.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing, Phil, when we start talking about like doing something that I theoretically don't want to do, but it is the right thing to do because it's the best thing for us, the we, and so often we put the me before the we, and I find it kind of curious when People talk about Jesus coming and turning the tables upside down, and so he's turning upside down our concept of the world. I'm like, no, you know what? We turned it upside down. We continue to turn it upside down. Actually, Jesus is trying to right it. He's trying to turn it right side up. And I was talking to a friend yesterday, because we're talking about, moving forward into the theology and what we're doing in Clubhouse. And this came about, the willingness to suffer for the sake of the other. And I'm not saying wearing a mask is suffering, but to be honest with you, when I put the mask on, I do feel like sometimes I'm suffering, because I like looking into people's eyes and seeing their, the facial expressions and things and talking, but it's not suffering. And yet I do sometimes feel like it's an infringement upon my rights, because I just go in there going, I'm vaccinated, I'm boosted, I'm washing my hands on stuff. Why should I wear? And then I have to catch myself and say, dude, holy cow, man, like, take a breath, okay? Because there on the cross, man, Jesus taught me that this life is not my own. And that's hard, because on the cross, he was acknowledging to the world that his life was more than just his. And that's a hard and sometimes I wonder, though, if we truly let go and let God, we have these wonderful Christian, sayings. I think we're afraid of, what if we really were who we were supposed to be and life was joyous, even in the midst of suffering, where we could look at, I'm reading The Radical King by Cornel West, and it's about the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the thing that he says in there that just every single time I'm like, holy crap. The reason why we have hard times with like racial injustice and the injustices within civil rights is because most of the evangelical church, which is predominantly from a historical standpoint been led by the whiteness, is that it rejects suffering for the sake of celebration. It does not want to suffer because suffering shows a sign of weakness. And Dr. West is saying how the one thing that the evangelical church has missed out on from his Black brothers, is what he says, is Black brothers and sisters, is how to embrace suffering is a form of celebration about this joyous ability where Christ on the cross was suffering for the sake of the world. And it's not saying that the suffering is joy, because that's not what the writer of the Hebrews says, right? He says, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross. So it recognizes that in our taking up our crosses and following Christ, there is suffering, but it's for the joy that we're doing it. And so that joy is so overwhelming that it can do nothing else but consume our suffering, so that then it redeems the suffering into something joyous. And when I read that from Dr. West, who his life as a Black man in American society, he's an academic, and he grew up in the civil rights, and for him to say that, for me, I was just like, I'm taken back when people who I know have experienced suffering and I know have been just pressed down in life, with loss, and when they're able to say, but I love the Lord and I have joy in my heart, I'm like, wow, it makes me have to step back and go, dude, do you know this Jesus that they know? This Jesus, and I'm like, I want to know that Jesus. And so I feel like that's why when we're talking about the relational aspect, the only way for me to understand incarnation is for me to understand the communal truth of who I am first, because I only understand the profundity, the depth of what it means to incarnate when I experience it through others. And when I've never met Dr. West, but through reading his stories and stepping in with his willingness to share with me, through his books, what he suffered, by standing up for others, civil rights and the like, and still having this profound love, not only for Jesus, but for people who look like me, who were beating on him as he's grown up. To me, and Jim, like hearing about the doctrine of discovery, that kind of like, that's why I think this communal aspect is so necessary. But it only happens when folks are willing to be incarnational, to be authentic and willing to be vulnerable, and to share, because each one of us knows that there's been moments in our lives when we've been vulnerable and it's been used against us. And I'm like, yeah, every time I want to complain, I just look at the life of Jesus. I'm like, holy crap, his vulnerability got him killed. And he still comes back with the resurrection, right? And says, I still, like you said, Jim, his response to that is, oh, okay, well, yeah, you guys are pretty serious about your hate. Guess what? I'm even more serious about this love thing, you know? And so it's crazy.
You're just going to leave it at that?
Oh, I was trying not to answer a question. I was trying not to ask a question, because every time I ask a question, you're like, oh, that's too much, you know? So I was like, I'll just pause and just kind of fade. And then that they can just make up whatever question they want. I'm just, you know.
We talk about being leaders, are Christians to be leaders, and with the whole mask thing and all that, the bottom line is Jesus says greatness comes by route of being less, being servant of all, right? And so it's not about being leaders and being masks, but really, maybe the masks just needs to be an opportunity to say, I'm willing to taking into consideration the least, the last of these. When Jesus says, when he's separating the goats from the sheep, it's, when did we do this, or when did we see this, and when we did see that? It's like, well, whatever you did for the least of these, you're doing for me. And so I think, and I think the problem is this word that's being tossed around is this idea of freedom, and it's even sad when even the Christian church says, Jesus Christ died for my freedom. It's like, no. That's totally against, anything biblical. When you talk about community, that's what the whole scriptures are centered on. It's this dying to yourself and being part of something bigger than yourself, right? It's being part of a community and thinking how you contribute. And so, like I was, as I think about this freedom thing, and this whole mask is about freedom, right? My freedom, I want my freedom, and that's what even the Christians say. But I'm going to spiritualize everything. So sorry for bringing up the Bible, but Galatians 5:13, and this is the Living Translation. It says, "For you have been called to live in freedom, my brothers and sisters, but don't use your freedom to satisfy your sinful nature. Instead, use your freedom to serve one another in love." And so I think that, if we want to talk about freedom, we use the freedoms that we have. And, some people would say, well, it's mandated and blah, blah. Why it's mandated is because we live in a community that's so independent. We don't want to be so independent that we have to, kind of like, hey, this is the communal thing to do. Sounds odd, but it isn't it? When you have to mandate because people aren't willing to say, I'm part of something larger than myself. That's the sad part. That's really the sad part.
Well, it's interesting too, with anyone who has kids, you live in a mandated house. Your 12-year-old doesn't just get up and say, I'm going to just go chill with my friends. I'll take the car today. Like you're like, no, that's not the case. When my kids were, and they'll tell you these stories, when they were, 12, 13, 10, 9, and it was time for bed and we'd be out watching TV, they had the mandate of being in their room. Well, they didn't follow that. So they would sneak out, and we live in, so it's interesting to me when people bring up the mandate, or like, I'm like, but we have rules in our own home. Okay. So I just don't get parents, to be honest, but for a Christian though, if you see it as mandated and rule following, then my thing is, man, are you really living out the truth of what it means to be human today? Right? Because whether or not I like it, I follow the rules of the road when I drive, because it is better for you all that we have a semblance of organization and stuff. But that's, whether we think about it or not, it's a loving act. The fact that I'm not just running around,
Yeah, I was thinking years ago, I was part of it, when I was a youth pastor, we met at this one girl's house. Her name was Kathy, but there was this other girl that started showing up, and the reputation that she had was her parents let her do anything she wanted. They had parties at her house. They would buy the booze, they would provide the pot. It was like nut crazy, but but she was like, she had all this freedom. But she started coming to youth group, and she just kept coming and coming and coming. And then the party Kathy became really, really close friends with, the Kathy that was hosting, or hosting, our ministries. And so I said, what is it about, Kathy, the party Kathy? I said, what is it about? Your parents let you do anything you want, but what is it about coming here? What is it that you find gratifying? And she says, I love hanging around Kathy because her parents, or she has rules.
Mm.
And to me, those rules is that somebody loves you.
Mm.
And those, those rules are in play. And so she says, I want to be around. She says, it sounds crazy, but I want to be a place where there's boundaries, because to me, that's what love means. And so just, when you started talking about that, I think, I mean, it is, because we want to protect, we want to make safe, we want to, and there's times where like, why, I mean, like, I can think of times where I'm like wondering, why are my parents making me do this? But, there is an underlying love that's, established there, even though we might not fully understand, even though we might be rebellious, that these, these boundaries isn't only for you, but it's for, those around us as well.
I mean, isn't that how the 10 Commandments are? Like there are reasons behind every single word in the Bible and why it's in there. And that's the same thing with like parents, even as silly as, stay in your room, like it's bedtime. There is a reason to that. Like, hey, like it's in your best interest to get enough sleep. It's in all of our best interests that we all get enough sleep for tomorrow and your functionality of the day. It's in our best interest to respect one another and to love one another and to see the other in depth. And, those things are in the Bible for a reason. And that's the same thing that parents, why parents set rules and boundaries for a reason, so that we can properly, because we are like children when it comes to faith. We don't fully understand the big picture, and we can't necessarily see or understand the why behind the rules and the boundaries, and we just need them to be set in place. We need God to be like, okay, you might not see this, but I'm seeing it, and so I'm going to set this in place for you, so that I'm going to just take care of you in this way. And there's something to trusting in that, and just saying, okay, you know what, if I know and believe that you love me, then I can trust in these boundaries and these rules, and these commandments that you have set before me, and I can follow them because I know and believe that you love me and you're doing these things out of love. And that's the same with these mandates. I know and believe in this God that loves me, and I'm trusting in that. And so I'm living that out. And part of what he says is, hey, you're living in this world, you're not of it, but you got to respect your leaders. You got to respect what they're saying. And you are, still a citizen. We're still citizens in this country, and we want to take care of our country and our fellow people. And part of that is respecting our leaders and saying, okay, there's this mandate in place. I'm not going to walk into a restaurant naked. I'm going to go in with clothes on. I am going to wear the mask when I grocery shop. Like, just as much as I want my kids to respect rules and boundaries that I have in my household, I'm going to respect these rules and boundaries that are set in these public settings for the sake of the other. Just as much as I'm going to respect the rules and boundaries that my God has set for my life, because I know that they are placed out of love.
In addition to all that, going back to the idea of freedom that you brought up, Jim, I think we forget that. Well, we want to define freedom as the notion to be able to do whatever I want to do, whatever I would want to do, and forgetting the notion that we're influenced by sin. So we're not doing what we want to do. We're doing what the sin is dragging us toward doing. And so we forget, I think we forget that. And so yeah, definitely we end up needing mandates and things to say, hey, wait, no, this is what the loving thing looks like. And so we need something. I may not always say that anything that government tells us to do is something that's ultimately loving. So let me be careful and put that one out. but there are spaces where, yeah, the loving thing needs to be defined. It needs to be laid out in front of us because we don't recognize it, because we're blinded by the sin that dwells within us. So sometimes we do need to see it. And yeah, I have friends again who who have troubles with the mask wearing, with vaccinations and all the stuff. So, you know, so we wrestle back and forth on it. And just with even the pandemic by and large, but that's a weird one. But yeah, we'll go back and forth on it, but it's just thinking, okay, yo, I'm gonna do this thing just to demonstrate love, and I may be wrong, you know, and it's like, but no, I'm trying, I'm doing my best I can to be loving, to help the other, and this is what I'm gonna do for this, just because I believe it's possibly the best thing to do to help someone else. So yeah.
Yeah, amen, dude. That's such a great point. And I don't think people, even the church, what we think we want to do that's fully free, we don't take into account that it's still led by sin. That's such a great point, Phil, that sin is got to be brought into it. So while I might say, yes, but I want to do what I want to do and it's free and I'm going to be, you know, I'm not going to hinder anyone else. You have to take into account that that's such a brilliant point that people just forget, right? They I don't want to deal with sin, right? I'm not that bad. I mean, that's such a great point. I mean, my brother and I have definitely differing views of the mandates, the vaccinations, and the masks. And so I just walk around with him, and I had to have a spray of bleach, and I just spray around him so he doesn't get anything. I'm like, you know, because on the bottle of the bleach it says it kills COVID. Like, so I'm just like, and this is what the president says. So when everyone around him, I'm like, he's not going to infect you. I'll just get it. You know, I just keep spraying. You know, and no, but we have to lovingly embrace those around us that might not have the same views, right? And so you're right. And how to do that, though. It's such a brilliant point, though, that you bring. It's so simple, but not that, hey, when you think that you're fully free, remember, though, you still have that sin thing, okay? Because our push into perfection is not going to be complete on this side of, you know, heaven until Christ comes back again. So I think that's such a great point to remember. And as we continue in our discussions, you know, we're going to move into redemption and move into reconciliation. But what does this mean, really, to be the leaders, to be the one out front that Christ calls us to, right? And it's really, again, I know it sounds hard because people are like, well, what about them? It's not about those who have not come to a loving acceptance of Christ as their Savior and their King, right? This is for the church first and foremost. And so if we start comparing, then we've already lost. That's what Satan wants, right? He wants us to look. People should just pick up screw tape letters, you know, and read some of it. But this is where the education comes in. And so this is what New Wineskins is all about: education, consultation, and transformation. We want to continue this talk, you know, moving into what does it look like to have like a poverty of the soul, you know, to step into a need, to step into a weakness that really gives us strength. And as we move into the fulfillment of promises, we want to continue to highlight this. And so as we close, I'm not sure if any one of you has a final thought before we sign off. Next week, Friday, the 28th, we're going to continue this as we move from this incarnation and redemption, continue to talk about this and what does it look like for fulfilled promises for those, the Christian in the 21st century. For those of you that don't follow New Wineskins on Facebook, just right now, you can just go right up to the New Wine name right there by the video and just hover over it. And then it'll bring up the drop down. You can hit like. And then that way, anytime New Wine goes on live or we put a post up on our Facebook page, you'll be informed or come up in your news feed. And if you want to be informed right straight away when we go live, then just go right over to the right side of your video right now and hit that bell. And the bell will be notifications, and you just notify all notifications from New Wineskins on Facebook. And that way our videos, our articles, happenings of New Wine, then you'll be notified. We also are on YouTube /New Wineskins. And then this video will be posted at there. All live Facebook episodes are put back up on our YouTube page. So just head on over to YouTube. And then that way too, on the bottom of the descriptions of every of the YouTube videos, you can see where else you can find YouTube, New Wineskins on Instagram, on Clubhouse, on Twitter. We have plenty of opportunities for you to engage. And so New Wineskins, building relational bridges in contemporary culture through Jesus Christ. And you're invited to join us because this is a communal thing to where we get to step in and learn what it means to love self, so as to love other, because why? We love the Lord our God. And so on behalf of Phil and Kayla and Jim, I'm Matt. This has been another episode of New Wine Uncorked. Until next Friday, we'll see you on the flip side. Have a good one.